Kevin knew that he shouldn't be texting in class, but his friend Dalton was in the hospital again after being beaten by Dominic Archer's men. Just as he was texting Dominic's sister Gwen Archer, Kevin was surprised to see a hand snatch away his phone. It was Professor Murdoch. "Gotcha!" she exclaimed. She didn't say it loudly, but everyone in the classroom could hear her as clear as a bell. "What be luck to get caught sitting in the last row playing with his phone," one of the students whispered to another. They'd already seen him running laps yesterday, and now they were wondering what would happen. When Kevin heard everyone whispering instead of feeling ashamed, he just smiled. "Professor Murdoch, it's not what you think. I was just taking a look." Kevin even reached out his hand to take his phone back. "You want to take your phone back after I've confiscated it? It won't be that easy," she replied sternly. "I just don't understand you, Kevin. Your classmates aren't listening to the lecture because they're from rich families and can get herbal meds without working for them. But why aren't you paying attention? Didn't you learn anything from yesterday's punishment?" Professor Murdoch continued. "You have a great opportunity here. Don't you understand that? Do you really want to be a laughingstock for the rest of your life? Think about it." After she said that, the professor took Kevin's phone and walked back to the podium. "There was a lot less pressure when I was just hanging around the house," Kevin muttered to himself as he watched her walk away. The other students had been taking various herbal meds, so they had excellent hearing. There was some laughter in the room when they heard Kevin's complaint. Professor Murdoch naturally heard Kevin too, and she spun around to stare at him. "I'm disappointed in you, Kevin," Professor Murdoch said angrily. "Since you're acting like a kindergartner, I'm going to treat you like one. Move your desk over to the corner for the rest of the day. You can't move until I say so." This was very upsetting for Kevin. He'd gotten off to a really bad start with Professor Murdoch, and it just kept getting worse. "After I steal the consolidation formula, I won't be coming back to this creepy place," Kevin thought to himself, but he didn't say it out loud this time. The professor tossed Kevin's phone onto the table, and then she had an idea. "I think it's time for us to choose a student leader. This is a very important position because the student leader has duties outside the classroom," she continued, "like supervising everyone's progress and handing out assignments to everyone." The students got very excited because this would give them a chance to get closer to Professor Murdoch and brown-nose her. If you did a good job, who knows where this opportunity could lead? Plus, what was really important for these rich, privileged young people was that it would give them some power. A lot of them enthusiastically raised their hands to volunteer for the position. But Professor Murdoch stopped them and explained, "In the interest of fairness, tomorrow's election will be anonymous. Just remember that you can't vote for yourself, so I expect you to use the honor system." When the lesson was finally over, Kevin was still sitting in the corner in a very bad mood. This definitely wouldn't help his reputation on campus. "Well, that was humiliating," Kevin said to himself as he got up from his seat. "Kevin, you can go back to your regular seat now. However, there's something I want to talk to you about," the professor instructed him without even looking up from her notes. What now? How could there possibly be anything to talk about? Kevin thought as he looked at Professor Murdoch in disbelief. She motioned for the class to be quiet while she spoke. "Please be patient. This will only take a couple of minutes." She paused for a moment. "As long as you're all going to be in the same class, I think you should get to know each other socially. So I've decided to treat you to dinner." As soon as she finished speaking, one of the students stood up to address the class. It was Michael Tripp, a young stud from Detroit. "We couldn't possibly let you treat us, Professor. After all, you're about to teach us the deepest secrets of herbal medicine. The least we can do is to invite you to dinner," he announced. "In fact, I'll treat the whole class to dinner, in your honor," Mike said with a broad smile. It sounded like a sincere invitation, but Mike wasn't just trying to butter up the professor. He was also trying to buy votes for the election. He really wanted to be the student leader. "But I couldn't possibly let you do something like that," Professor Murdoch replied warily. "It's no big deal, Professor. Just think of it as me treating you to dinner and taking along a few friends. Mike explained. He was really laying it on thick. Just then, 2 other students stood up. "Professor Murdoch, I think Mike's right," Luther Holmes said loudly. "I agree. It would be great for all of us to unwind and get to know you," Lionel Chandler chimed in. He was a good brown-noser too. These 2 guys weren't very rich, but they were both very smart. After only 2 days of classes, they'd made friends with Mike Tripp. By supporting him now, they might be rewarded later on. The whole class got very excited as everyone discussed what they should do. One of them pointed out that it was a great chance for the faculty and students to get to know each other. They did their best to convince Professor Murdoch to accept Mike's offer. Seeing that most of his classmates wanted to go, Mike broke into a smile. He turned around and very politely said, "Professor Murdoch, the class really wants to go with this plan. Why don't you join us?" She thought for a moment and then nodded in agreement. "Okay, I will." Faculty members weren't allowed to accept gifts or see students privately, but since the whole class was going, she wouldn't be accused of favoritism. It was really no big deal to just have a meal with them. What Professor Murdoch was interested in was observing the students during the dinner so that she could have some insight into their personalities. This would make it easier for her to handle the class over the next couple of years. "Great! Since Professor Murdoch is on board, I'll get someone to make all the arrangements for transportation. We're all going to the Whistler Hotel this evening," Mike said happily. Although the Salix Leaf Hotel was now the most exclusive place in Chicago, it was by far the most expensive venue to have a meal, especially with such a large group. But the problem was that Mike really couldn't afford to invite so many people to the hotel's restaurant for dinner. The Whistler Hotel was definitely more in his budget. On top of that, the Whistler Hotel's restaurant still had a fine reputation. In some ways, it was even better than the Salix Leaf Hotel. Many of the students in the class took public transportation. Even though they were all from wealthy families, it was a lot more convenient with all the traffic jams in Chicago. If it wasn't construction, it was snow or an accident. But a little more than half of the students still drove to school by themselves, and there were others who got rides to and from campus every day. But for an occasion like this, a small number of students would have to ask for rides to get to the hotel for dinner. As they were all heading out of the building, Mike suddenly asked, "Hey, Kevin, why don't you take a taxi to the hotel?" "Why would I do that?" Kevin asked him in surprise. "I'm just going by how you're dressed. I'm pretty sure nobody will let you in their car looking like that," Mike said with a snobby smile. He'd just come up with a plan. If he could put Kevin down, it might make an impression on his classmates. It would be a win-win to turn them against Kevin and also treat the class to dinner. "Mike's absolutely right," Lionel agreed. "Kevin, Professor Murdoch really took it easy on you today. That's why you're being allowed to come along to tonight's dinner. Don't put any of your classmates in an embarrassing position. Just take a taxi. If you don't have enough money on you for a cab or to call for a ride on an app, I'll give you a few bucks to cover you. How about $20? Then he pulled some cash out of his pocket and offered it to Kevin. Everyone around them laughed when they saw him do this. They really thought Kevin was pathetic. Kevin frowned as he looked at the money in Lionel's hand. He wondered what the heck was wrong with these guys. "Aren't you overwhelmed by my generosity?" Lionel grinned as he patted Kevin on the shoulder. "There's no need to thank me. After all, we're classmates." "Did I tell you I needed a ride?" Kevin replied very coolly. "What do you mean? Don't tell me you drove here," Mike sneered. "You really drove here, Kevin? Quick, show everyone what kind of ride you have. Is it an electric scooter or a bicycle?" Lionel mocked him. The other students around them were really interested in seeing what kind of car Kevin had. "I'll bet he doesn't even have a license," one of them commented. Considering his reputation, they expected him to be driving an old minivan or some other kind of beater. "Look, Kevin, everyone's interested in seeing your car. Why don't you just show it to everyone?" Mike sneered while he continued to mock him. Before Kevin could answer, Professor Murdoch stood up for him and warned them. "Don't bully Kevin anymore. This outing is supposed to be fun." Although Professor Murdoch could be very strict, she treated her students with respect. So when she saw Kevin being bullied, she naturally couldn't just stand there and do nothing. "Kevin, why don't you ride with me?" Professor Murdoch offered calmly. "How could you do that, Professor? Kevin's clothes are so shabby. He might get your seats dirty," Mike pointed out. He didn't want to give anyone a chance to be alone with Professor Murdoch right now, at least until after the student leader election tomorrow. "That's okay. If my car gets dirty, I'll take it to a car wash," Professor Murdoch answered casually. She didn't seem to mind at all. "Thank you for your kind offer, Professor Murdoch, but I really did drive to school today," Kevin told her. Professor Murdoch made a slight frown. She really didn't know what Kevin was thinking. Couldn't he tell that she was trying to give him a way out of this embarrassing situation? "Did everyone hear that? Kevin said that he really drove here," Mike said loudly. "Let's all go take a look at his car." Everyone laughed when they heard this, and then they went along with Mike. They didn't mind showing up a little late for dinner as long as they could have some fun at Kevin's expense. "Lead the way, Kevin. Where'd you park your whip?" Mike said in a very arrogant tone of voice. Kevin turned around and walked towards his car without saying another word. The group of students followed along behind him. They wanted to see how this useless good-for-nothing would make a fool of himself this time. A few minutes later, Mike looked at the in front of him in utter disbelief and asked Kevin, "This is your car?" "Yeah, it's a little more comfortable than my scooter," Kevin replied with a slight grin. When the others heard this, their jaws dropped. They all knew that this was a brand new. It was worth at least $3 million, if you could even find one for sale. Suddenly, Professor Murdoch glanced at Kevin with a look of appreciation in her eyes. "Did you rent this with your wife's money?" Mike asked him. Then he continued to bully him. "Kevin, I'm sure your wife works very hard. It isn't right for you to spend her money like this outside." "You know, you could probably rent one yourself," Kevin interrupted him. Mike didn't know how to respond to Kevin's wisecrack. Like everyone else, he really wanted a. Even a rental would be good for showing off. But the problem was he had no idea where he could rent one. "Please, have a seat, Professor. You must be tired after a long day of teaching," Kevin offered as he opened the door and invited her to get in. Then, while he ignored Mike and the others, he walked around and got behind the wheel. As it turned out, Professor Murdoch had something to say to Kevin, so she accepted his offer and strapped herself into the passenger seat. Mike clenched his fist and grunted. He took his friends Lionel and Luther and headed to his car. Kevin was nervous to be alone with Professor Murdoch, but this might give him a chance to clear the air.
Hi, Kevin here. If you're wondering what happens next, then stay tuned on the Pocket FM Universe channel for more episodes.